Today, we're diving into a really mind-bending idea from the philosopher Ernst Cassirer, based on his work, Language and Myth. We're going to explore how the symbols we use, our words, our stories, don't just describe the world. They actually literally create it. So let's start with a pretty provocative question, right? Was everything humans did before science just one huge, embarrassing error? For a long time, the answers seemed to be a definite yes. The whole age of myth, with all its gods and magic and spirits, was seen as this primitive phase we had to outgrow to get to clear, rational, scientific thought. But what if that's completely wrong? You see, the standard view was that myth was just bad science, a failure of the human mind, an error that happened because people just didn't know any better. Thinkers like Max Muller even went so far as to argue that it was a kind of sickness, a disease caused by language itself. So let's first dig into that traditional theory, this idea that myth is basically a bug, a glitch in our mental software. Muller's whole argument was that language is just inherently slippery and ambiguous. For instance, he'd point out that the Sanskrit name for the dawn, ahana, sounds a lot like the Greek word for the laurel tree, Daphne. So, he argued, our brains just got confused. We forgot we were talking about the sunrise and accidentally made up a story about a god chasing a nymph who turns into a tree. For Muller, all of mythology was basically just one big, unavoidable misunderstanding. But here is the massive hole in that theory. A simple mistake, or just plain ignorance, well, that's a negative. It's an absence of something. Myth, on the other hand, is incredibly positive and creative. It builds entire worlds, it inspires whole cultures, and it has a kind of power you just can't explain away as a glitch. It's not empty at all. It is bursting with meaning. So, if myth wasn't a mistake, what was it? This is where Ernst Cassirer comes in with a totally radical alternative. What if myth was humanity's original operating system, the very first way we learned to process and create our reality? Cassirer's big idea is something he called symbolic forms. He argued that we don't just sit back and passively receive some pre-made reality. No way. We actively construct it using tools like language, art, and, myth. These things aren't just flawed mirrors of the world. They're the very organs we use to perceive and create a meaningful reality in the first place. And this chart illustrates the difference perfectly. The logical, scientific mind, that's us most of the time, it works by expansion. It takes one piece of data and tries to connect it to a whole system of other data. It's analytical. But the mythic mind, it does the exact opposite. It concentrates. It gets completely and totally captivated by one immediate, intense experience. It doesn't analyze reality. It gets overwhelmed by it. And in that powerful moment, it creates a new reality. So, how does that actually work? I mean, how do you go from a feeling to a full-blown god? Well, the research of Hermann Usener gives us a fascinating peek under the hood. Usener basically mapped out this amazing evolutionary path for gods. And it all starts with something he called the momentary god. Now, this isn't some grand, all-powerful being. It's something born from a single, powerful, fleeting moment of pure emotion. Just look at these examples from the Evi tribe in Africa. An intense feeling, like total relief or sheer terror or safety, it becomes so overwhelming that it just gets projected onto whatever object is right there. The emotion is released, and what's left standing in front of the person is a god. For that one person in that one moment, the spring isn't like a god, it is a god. Then, as society gets more organized, guess what? So do the gods. They evolve from these momentary feelings into what Usener called special gods. These are basically divine patrons for specific, repeatable activities. The ancient Romans had a god for pretty much every single step of farming. Aquator, for instance, wasn't the god of agriculture in general. He was the god of one single task, harrowing a field. His entire reality was tied to that one human job. Now, this whole process hinges on one absolutely crucial element, language. Because in the mythic worldview, a word isn't just a label. It's a piece of raw, untamed power. This is the concept of word magic. It's the core belief that a thing's name and its very soul are identical. The name isn't a pointer to reality. It is a piece of that reality. It holds the power of whatever it denotes. Which means, if you know something's true name, you have control over it. The story of Isis and Ra is the perfect example of this. Ra was the most powerful god of them all, but Isis, through sheer cunning, tricked him into revealing his secret name. And as soon as she knew that name, she had his power. This wasn't just a fun story. For the Egyptians, this reflected a fundamental truth about how the universe actually worked. In this idea that the name and reality are one, it extends to our own selves. Your name wasn't just what people called you, it was a fundamental part of who you were. In Egypt, your name was as real as your body. You needed it to survive in the afterlife. For the Romans, if you didn't have a name, like a slave, you weren't even considered a legal person. The name literally created the self. So this all leads us to the most profound, mind-blowing step in this whole evolution, how language didn't just name the stuff in the world, but eventually created the very idea of the self, the I.
Think about it like this. Before there were individual gods, a lot of cultures just saw the world as being filled with this impersonal, anonymous energy, a force called mana in some places, or Wakanda by the Sioux. It was just spiritual static. The creation of all those momentary and special gods was the act of that power getting focused, crystallizing into specific, named beings. But the final incredible leap was when language got sophisticated enough to talk about something even more abstract: pure existence, the concept of being itself. And this is a huge shift. The center of ultimate reality moves from being out there in all those named gods and forces to being in here. The highest, most powerful concept is no longer some objective force you try to control with a name, but the subjective reality of your own consciousness. And this right here is the ultimate expression of that shift. When Moses asks for God's name, the secret password that's supposed to give him power, the answer he gets just completely blows up the old system of word magic. God's name isn't a label, it's a verb. It is the very definition of pure, subjective being, I am. The highest divine concept has become identical to the concept of the self. So, what does this all mean? It means the mythic mind, the one we were so quick to call primitive and wrong, was actually doing the foundational work for all of us. It wasn't making mistakes. It was forging the very conceptual tools, the ideas of gods, of names, of being, and finally of the self that our logical, scientific minds just take for granted today. That ancient software, it's still running in the background of everything we do.
Which leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If Cassirer is right, and the symbols we use aren't neutral, if they actively build our world, then what about us? Take a look at the words we use every single day, the metaphors we live by, the stories we tell ourselves. What kind of reality are they building for us right here, right now?